Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I wanted to share something that some people might not care, but I just wanted to share it because I feel like it's a, a perspective that most people don't have or maybe just think about. So I wanted to share my thoughts on the trans community as a Christian. I should say as a Bible believing Christian because I definitely think that is matters as far as how I see things now versus how I might have seen them when I was more of a lukewarm Christian. And I think overall, my perspective is going to also talk about how I feel about the type of love, what actually is love according to the Bible. So two things I feel like are really important because I feel like the world version of love or the worldly version of love is not biblical. So first and foremost, I've watched multiple videos of trans people. I've also seen videos of people who detransitioned, who left the trans community. And I feel like watching both versions, both perspectives helps me have a just a better understanding, like what makes someone want to be trans, why do trans people exist. Um but I also feel like seeing people who detransition gives you like a lot of information as well. I feel like this is why it's so important to not just listen to one side because I feel like the a lot of people who follow and I don't have a political stance on this. This is not coming from any type of like politics or anything. It's really just about like what being trans, like what I believe is the root of someone being trans from a Christian perspective. So I would say the root cause of what causes someone to be trans is a rejection of how God's created that person. And when I say that, I think I'm saying this is coming from a biblical perspective, right? Because as a Christian, I believe, right, that God created every single person. And the Bible even says God forms every person in the womb. He knows the number of hairs on their head. He has there's so much details. God knows like every detail about you because he's that intentional and purposeful with creating us. And he says that about every single person. He forms every single person in the womb. And also if you go back to Genesis, God talks about, how he created humans and he made them male and female, right? So, I would say every video I've watched of a trans person is, whether a trans woman, trans men, they don't like the way that they're born, right? And they have this idea that they should have been born or that they are the opposite gender. And I honestly feel like that thought is a demonic spirit. I don't think people have those thoughts because God gives those to them. It comes from the enemy because the devil wants to destroy everything good that God created, right? And so he attacks people with lies. And I feel like the lie that someone who is trans believes is that they should have been the opposite gender or that there's something that they're obviously not. Like I was born a biological male, but I feel like I'm a woman. and I think I'm a woman, or I was born a biological female, but I feel like I'm a man. And so that initial thought, it comes from the enemy. That is not God. That thought is not coming from God, because God tells us from the beginning, He formed us in His womb, He created us, He designed us with a purpose, and that He loved us, right? So the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He's also the father of lies, and he brings confusion. And so the devil will tempt people through their thoughts, right? So this is what I feel like people need to understand about how the devil works. He plants seeds into people, not knowing whether or not those seeds are going to actually take heed, right? Because the devil doesn't actually have power. And this is how I understand it, right? The devil will tempt you with as many things as he can tempt you, but once he sees you fall for that temptation, once he sees you falter with something that he tempted you with, he'll continue tempting you with that thing. So if the devil initially tempts someone with, that they should have been a boy, or they should have been a girl, if that thought doesn't bring about any sort of change, or um any sort of fruit. And I guess the best way to explain it is like, in order for that seed to take hold, that person has to come into agreement with that thought. So, like, as a Christian, if the devil is tempting you with something, your response is to reject it. And what's the word in Christianity called? It's not just reject. You're supposed to not refute it, but rebuke. That's what it is. Like, the devil will tempt you with things, like, because the devil tempts. That's He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to tempt people, get them out of the will of God. So he will put as many things into your head as he can. And then, but he doesn't have those things, don't have power over you until you come into agreement with it. And that's what people don't realize. It's not that you were actually those things, it's that you came into agreement with that. And once you come into agreement with whatever the devil is tempting you with, that's how it turns into sin. Because once you come into agreement with it and align your thoughts with it and align your heart with it, now there goes your actions that are aligning with those things too. So it starts with the thought, you agreeing with the thought, coming into agreement with it. And that coming into agreement with that is what gives the enemy power over you. So when the devil is tempting you with something and you rebuke it, that doesn't have power over you because you're not aligning yourself with it. But when the enemy tempts you with something and you're like, oh, I think I actually am, that's where the agreement, there's demonic laws, right? And there's things that, when you gave the devil power by agreeing with the temptation to begin with, by coming into alignment with it. If you don't rebuke it and say, that's not of God, I don't agree, this is how God created me, you know and instead it's like, well, actually, I think maybe that is true. The enemy planted the lie, planted the seed, and it doesn't take fruition though until you come into agreement with it. So that's how the enemy works, right? He plants thoughts, plants seeds that don't come from God. These thoughts that the enemy is tempting you with, things that are meant to destroy you, that are meant to harm you, and that are meant to take you out of God's will. So basically, I just watched this testimony of a man who had transitioned to a woman, was living their life as a woman, and then, found Jesus and detransitioned. And I think his testimony really was a really good insight to, the thoughts of someone who's trans, because he basically said a lot of it came from, him seeking the attention of men, and he had this, he saw, he felt, saw, had this, created this image of himself that he was supposed to be a woman, and he idolized being a woman over anything else. And so he was seeking to do all of these things and get all of these surgeries and do all these cosmetic things because he had created an idol of his own, of this image he wanted for himself, not that God wanted for him. Because people have to realize someone becoming trans is not in alignment with God, because how God created you is how God intended for you to be. You know, someone who is trans is essentially rejecting how God created them in order to live their life according to their own image, their own thoughts, how they feel they should have been. So it is rejecting God's God's design and God's will in order to live by your own will. God does not create people to be trans. And I feel like I have to say that because there's people who say God made you that way. But it's like, even if with trans, I feel like that's one of the biggest lies. Like, how can you say God created someone that way? Like, if God intended for someone to be a woman, he would have created them as a woman, right? No one chooses their biology, no one chooses their DNA. Like, biological sex is ingrained into your DNA. And if God says he formed you in the womb, he didn't make a mistake with how he created you. You're either, to be trans is basically to say God made a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be this way. I was supposed to be something else. But that's what the enemy does. He gets into people's head, plants that seed of confusion, plants that seed of, you know, I was supposed to be something else. And then that person, a person can either come into agreement with that or say, actually, no, I don't think that's true, or rebuke it, reject it, whatever. It's really important for me to say this, though, because it's still not, it's the devil doesn't have power unless you give him that power, right? And you give him that power by coming into agreement with it, because that gives the devil legal right to continue tempting you with that thing. And that's why sin is a struggle with our flesh, because it's hard, because once you come into agreement with it, it's like you gave the devil the right to continue putting those thoughts into your head and putting those feelings into your head. And he'll continue tempting you until you start believing it for yourself, right? That's how it works. You know, once he gets his foot in the door, he's going to continue putting that into your heart and putting that into your flesh and putting that into your spirit. But it wasn't there until you came into alignment with it, right? It doesn't have power until you align yourself with what the enemy is putting into your head. Until you align yourself with those things, it doesn't have power. That's why it's like really important to be in the word and in prayer and understand, being in God's will is so important. Because when you step out of his will, you're not doing things according to God. You're doing things according to yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, etc. So anyways, I watched this testimony of the man who detransitioned, and he had a kind of traumatic childhood, lost his father at a young age. And this is where I would say, I do think trauma is something the devil uses to bring destruction into people's lives. That trauma that is created this, he really just sought, to be loved. He wanted to be loved by a father that he didn't have growing up. And so it started as, oh, I just want attention from men. He liked receiving attention from men. But then it grew into, well, actually, I'm just a woman. I'm not a man at all. And I just want attention from men as a woman. And loving how he received attention from men as a woman. But this is where I feel like the reality check, in my opinion, comes in. He remembered, dating this man as a trans woman and saying, I want to be able to have a family. I want to be able to get pregnant. And that is just simply not possible for a trans woman to ever get pregnant. Why? Because the reality is biological males will never be able to get pregnant. Like it's like you can try to do everything. You can get all of these surgeries to look like a woman, to act like a woman, to do all of those things. But at the end of the day, it is not possible for a biological male to actually be a woman biologically, right? So it's like you can get all of these surgeries and all of these things to try to be that thing, but it doesn't make it actually so, because the root of that is it's the entire identity of a trans person is built around a lie. Because at the end of the day, it is a lie. The enemy put a lie into your head to begin with, which is that you were supposed to be a woman. No, you weren't. If you were supposed to be a woman, God would have made you a woman. If you were supposed to be a man, God would have made you a man. It's like your root belief as a trans person is believing God is not trusting the way God created you, is rejecting the way God created you to live a lie. To live a lie. And I have to say it like that because it is a lie. It is a lie at the end of the day that convinces a male they can be a woman, or convinces a female they can be a man. No amount of surgeries will make that actually the reality, objectively speaking, right? Because biological sex is the basis, is the design. These things are encoded into every part of your DNA. And it's like he could look like a woman to the world. Everyone can believe that he was a woman. But at the end of the day, when it comes to objective reality, he knew he was not really a woman. And that's where the entire issue actually arises, because it's like you fell for this lie, the lie that you could be something that you're objectively not, and then you're trying to basically get as close to that thing as possible, but you'll never actually be that thing. It's a deception. It's a lie. It's a trick to bring destruction. And he's talked about how he was so depressed because it's like deep down he knew. He knew he would never be a woman biologically. He couldn't have children. He couldn't get pregnant. He couldn't do any of those things that he wanted so badly to solidify the lie that he was in fact a woman. It's like, no, like I said, no amount of surgeries can eradicate or change your DNA, your biology. That God given, that God created, right? That's the whole thing. Like, how God designed you is not changeable. It's not changeable. I think, we're trying to, the medical field is basically doing all of these, what do they call it? I forget what it's called, but basically experimental surgeries. You're an experiment to the medical community at the end of the day. A lot of trans people are pretty much medical guinea pigs for the medical field of people, trying to basically make something impossible possible. Because like I said, biological sex is ingrained into your DNA. Every cell in your body has that DNA, and those chromosomes, those sex chromosomes, no amount of surgery can change that. It's embedded into every single cell of your body. Hormones don't change that, surgery doesn't change that. And I feel like that's the reality that I feel like is actually what creates the mental problems that trans people actually experience. I feel like it's deep down they know they're not the thing that they're claiming to be, but they're at war with what they want and what is objectively true. They're at war with themselves at the end of the day. And so they are projecting that onto the world though, right? If you don't accept me the way I feel like I was supposed to be, you're the problem, not me. But it's the reality is that they're warring within themselves. They know the truth, but they'd rather live the lie. They know the truth, but they'd rather live the lie of I'm something that I know I wasn't born this way. And I feel like this is where it's just like I've always understood that being trans, a trans person knows they're not the biological sex they're claiming to be or they're pretending to be. They're aware of that. To in order to be trans, you're aware that you are not that thing, but they're constantly pretending that they are. It's like they're lying to themselves. They're living a lie, and then they expect everyone else to also lie to them. And I guess it's just like they can only lie so much, right? And he also talked about in his testimony how it's like all of the people he dated were fine with him being trans, right? They weren't, but some of them also were ashamed of that. They're like, well, I don't want you to tell my parents that you're a trans woman or that you're, you know, it's like he could appear, you can appear as that thing. It doesn't make it so. It honestly is like it is a trick, it is a deception, because it's like no matter how much you look like a woman on the outside or a man on the outside, you know deep down you're not that thing. And so it's like I feel like that's the root that creates all of the chaos in a trans person's life, is that it's like it's truly like you're an imposter almost, because you're claiming to be something you know you're not, you're pretending to be something you know you're not, you're getting all these surgeries to try to live your life according to this lie to begin with, and that is creating the mental instability and being unhappy, because no amount of surgery is ever going to actually make you biologically a woman. And if that person can't accept that, which is what they want so badly, it's like again, this is a lie. It was a lie that the enemy planted in that person's mind to destroy them. He said he was depressed and suicidal because of this. I don't think it's just taking the hormones that makes people depressed and suicidal who are trans. I think it's living their life according to a lie that creates this feeling of dissatisfaction, because you're trying to do something, you're trying to live as something that it's impossible for you to live as, that you have to lie, and you're living a lie basically. The initial thought that you're trans is a lie, right? And it's just like the enemy, it comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Truthfully, the enemy just wants to destroy as many people as he can. And it's like, as a Christian, seeing that and understand that, obviously I have a lot of empathy for people in the trans community that struggle with that identity, because I feel like it's very sad to be like they're living in confusion about who they are. And that's not a struggle that I know. I don't identify as trans, obviously, but I can empathize with people. But I also think it's really important to recognize, at the end of the day, what a trans person is wanting, is seeking, is something that is not possible. It's like you're trying to get something that it's not possible for you to get, and that's the harsh truth and reality of it. So let me talk about the other half of that now that I've gotten that. So the other half of that is that the community, the LGBT community that claims to be loving and accepting, and I feel like there's this misunderstanding of love as being like love just accepts whatever. Love accepts any type of thing that is thrown at it. To love someone, you just accept them, and it's a love without boundaries or parameters, right? And this is something I feel like is important to understand. God's love for us is unconditional, but God's love for us also comes with rules. A loving parent does not allow their child to just do any and everything without any sort of rules, especially if that parent knows that it puts you in danger, right? Like, would we say a parent who lets their child stay out all night with no rules, no concerns about their safety, like, that's not, it's not truly loving your child to just say you can do whatever you want, and regardless of what you do, I'm going to love you even if you're doing things that put you in harm's way, and even if you're putting yourself in positions that could lead to death and sickness and illness and all of those things. Like, a love that just allows people to do whatever they want, and calling that love is not the way God loves us. God loves us unconditionally, but he loves us enough to also tell us, don't do these things that are going to put you in bad situations. Don't participate in these activities that are going to put you in dangerous situations that have harsh consequences, including death, right? A person who loves someone wants to protect them and doesn't want to put them in harm's way. So God shows us a love that comes with rules because he loves us enough that he wants to protect us from harm, from sickness, from illness, from being in positions that will put us in harm's way. A loving parent is going to put rules on their children. That's just at the end of the day. So I feel like people think like, oh, God has all these rules and restrictions, all these laws, but those laws are for our own good. They're for our protection. Even for me as an adult now, I didn't like that my mom was very strict. She had all these rules. I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers. I wasn't allowed to do these things. But as an adult, I can now understand that my mom putting all of these rules was her trying to protect us because she did love me, right? I've heard stories of, people getting assaulted going to a sleepover at a friend's house by the brother or the father or the cousin or the brother or whatever. My mom didn't trust other people, and she had a right not to. She wanted to protect me and my sisters from being in a situation she could not protect us from. So she had these rules that were designed to protect us. And people often think like the parent that's putting all these rules, it's not overbearing. And I guess and in two very extreme rules often feel that way. But I thought my mom was very strict growing up, but I appreciate it now as an adult because it was for my own good. It was for my protection. And it's the same way with God. God gave us the law, and following these laws, the law honestly protects you from a lot of bad situations. When we follow the laws God gives us, it's for our protection, it's for our own good. It keeps us out of harmful situations, or even just dealing with heartbreak and other things. So I think it's really important to understand love. Love is unconditional, but it still has boundaries. A love that doesn't have any boundaries and just says, I accept anything you want to do is fine, do whatever you want, even if it's going to cause harm to yourself or other people, is not a real loving person. That's not real love. And I honestly feel like the LGBT community often talks about a love that is just accepts whatever, even if it's harmful, even if it's dangerous, even if it's harmful to that person, right? And the other thing about, I made another video about, why I feel like people aren't supporting or why the issues with the trans community, including like putting trans, like wanting kids to transition and things like that. I feel like the reason I wouldn't support that is because there's all of these risks and harm that could potentially be done to these children, that you should not put a child on hormones or on puberty blockers or do any surgeries on a young child like that can't be reversed, have long-term side effects that are still unknown. It's like it's not worth the risk, right? So I think that's the difference between you know, how people think about it. It's just like you should want to protect people from harming themselves, right? Or doing getting a surgery that has a lifelong impact. So another thing the person talked about, and I'll link the video down below for anyone who wants to watch it. It is a long video, it's like 2 hours, so make sure you have time to watch it. I started it last night before bed. I didn't finish the whole thing. I watched like a little over an hour though of it. And he gives very detailed, like, um very detailed, has a lot of details in it. But anyways, he was about to get bottom surgery, which bottom surgery is very risky a lot of the times. It's also still very experimental. People don't realize, like I said, a lot of trans people are medical guinea pigs. They're being experimented on in ways that I personally feel like are very unethical. These doctors doing these surgeries don't have a lot of experience doing them. It's like they're really being used as guinea pigs at the end of the day. Um, but anyways, bottom surgery is not very safe. There's a lot of risk. Most people regret getting bottom surgery. I've seen multiple videos of trans people who did get bottom surgery that regret it and say like it had all of these harmful effects. And he even shared in his video how he wanted to be a woman so bad. He wanted to be as close to a woman so bad that he didn't care about the risk. He was willing to get it regardless, even if he might regret it in the future, because it's like they idolized this image of themselves. They created an image of who they're supposed to be. It's not according to God, it's according to themselves. That's the other part of it. As a Christian, I recognize, like, someone who's living their life as a trans person is living according to themselves. They're not living according to God. And I feel like it's important to recognize that, because it's just like people who say God made people that way don't are not telling the truth, right? That's not the truth of what is happening here. These people reject the way God made them and designed them to live their lives according to themselves, according to what they think, according to what they feel, according to what they want. That's not following God's will. And often they don't care about God's will. They just want to do what they want. And ultimately, that's true for every person. It's like being trans is not like, I feel like this is why I'm explaining it, because most people wouldn't say, well, being trans is not in the Bible as a sin or whatever, right? Like, and I guess I'm not talking about this really from a sinful place. It's more of just like, in order to be trans, you're not following the will of God. You're doing what you want and what you think and what you feel. Um, and I do think they idolize this image of themselves. So he idolized being a woman so much that he wanted to do all these surgeries, and he didn't care about the risk and the harm that came with it, because he had made an idol out of seeing himself as a woman and being a woman and living as a woman and all of these things. Even though every time he tried to live it out, he knew deep down, I'm not a woman. I can't get pregnant. I can't do all these things. And from another perspective as well, I honestly feel like a trans person has a very superficial understanding of what a woman is to begin with. You know, I would argue that in a lot of different ways, but I definitely believe like a trans person's identity as a woman is often based off of very superficial aspects of a woman. It's all more about the appearance. I have to appear like a woman. I have to look as close to as this image of woman as I feel. I want to be beautiful. I want men to give me attention. It's like they seek this image of womanhood that is a very superficial image of what a woman truly is, because the biblical design of woman is not about this superficial image. Like, God designed women with specific purposes, specific things, you know. And it's also not, it's not this superficial thing, you know. Women being nurturing and giving life and doing all of these things, submitting to their husbands and all of these things. These are, there's, it's more than just like this image. But most people in the trans community are focused on these superficial aspects of womanhood, you know, wearing makeup, having, wearing dresses, having long hair, having boobs, you know, getting bottom surgery. It's like, it's just the out, they're mostly focused on this outward appearance and the image of womanhood. And in a lot of ways, I do feel like that's one reason I feel like I don't, like, my identity as a woman is not built around, you know, liking pink, or, you know, just like these superficial things that I would say is more what a trans woman is focused on. You know, they're very, very focused on their image more than anything else. They want to appear to be a woman, but do they could be, and I feel like they have to focus on that because they know the other aspects of womanhood they will never be able to have, right? And I guess there's some trans women who believe that they don't need those things to be a woman, but it's just like, that's why they hold on to the most superficial aspects of womanhood, because any other aspect of woman, like birth, giving birth and carrying children and being mothers, they know they don't have access to those things, so they can't, they focus on the superficialness because that's all they can actually change, is the superficial, how they appear, how they look to the world. So it's like they have this very superficial identity as a woman to begin with, or their image of woman is built around the most superficial ideas of womanhood, in my opinion, as well, because there isn't a connection to womanhood on a biological level, which I feel like is the is the basis for someone being trans. It's just like you can't really separate the biological sex from gender. And I, it's like this whole everything within it is just like, there's so much confusion. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to confuse as many people. He wants to deceive as many people. He wants to lie to as many people, because ultimately he just wants people to be destroyed. He doesn't want you living your life the way God created you to be. He wants to trick you. He wants to deceive you. He wants to lead you down a path that ends in destruction. And so it's just like, people think Christians are being hateful by telling them the truth, when the real person is like, the actual problem is that these people are being deceived. They're living their lives according to the lie. They're not following God. They don't care about what God wants for them. Most of the time they don't care what God wants for them. They just want to live their lives according to themselves, which ultimately is what the God tells us about, you know. Those who reject him don't care about what God wants for them. They don't care about how God created them or how God designed them. They just want to live their life however they want. So I feel like that's kind of how I understand things as a Christian. Um I don't hate people in the trans community. I don't wish ill will on them. I honestly feel like, you know, they need the love of God more than anything. I just feel like it's really sad to see people really they're fighting for to live their life according to a lie to begin with. It's like, you can't be happy in yourself living a lie, living a deception, living as something that you deep down know is never going to be true. And there's no peace in that either, you know. You'll always be looking over your shoulder, or always be like, you'll never feel like you're enough, honestly. And I feel like that's the harsh truth that a lot of trans people probably struggle with deep down, whether they admit it or not. They're aware of the truth of their biology, and they're ignoring it. They're ignoring the truth to live a lie. I think that is the honest truth of it, of everything, is like, rejecting the truth to live a lie. So that's all I want to say. It's really sad, but ultimately it's like that wasn't God's plan for their life. That was Satan's plan for their life, to bring them to destruction. And I feel like that's the part that people who don't believe in God, who aren't Christians, are maybe never going to see or understand, because in their mind, from the worldly perspective, people just should be able to do whatever they want. But I've already explained to that why God loves us enough to put parameters and protections around us. He doesn't want us to be in harm's way. That's what the devil wants. So it's just like, God is loving and God is all of these things, but a love without rules or parameters is a love that is okay, basically, with people being harmed. And that's not who God is. God doesn't want us in harm's way, being hurt, um, all of those things. So that's all I'm going to say.